Algebra 1, simplifying negative and zero exponents. So in this part B of this concept, we're going to start with some vocab definitions and formulas. We're going to add to the exponent properties that you learned last time. So last time we covered the product, the quotient, and the power property. In this video, we're going to cover the zero and the negative property. And then in the table below, down in the notes section, we'll get down those two properties. You can also, for definitions, in exponential form, just get down that when it's in exponential form, that is a term with an exponent. And then when you evaluate an exponential term, that's rewriting it as a number value. So for let's just add this. That is a term with an exponent. And we looked at that in the first part of this concept. A term with an exponent. Now go to the table, that's the properties of exponents, and I have put two more properties that we're going to talk about. So the zero property of exponents. Now when raising any term except zero, it works for any number or variable except for zero, but if you raise it to the zero power, that's actually, the results will be the number 1. Now only the term or number that is raised to the zero power becomes 1. So for example, in A, 2 times x times y to the zero power. So technically 2 is to the first power, x is to the first power, and it's only y that's to the zero power. So only y becomes the number 1. So 2x times 1 is simply 2x. And in B, we have 3 divided by h to the zero power. So it's only the h that's affected. That becomes the value of 1. So that would be 3 divided by 1 is simply 3. And in part C, 5 is technically to the first power, r is to the second power, t is to the first power, so that is the term that becomes 1. So 5r squared times 1 is simply 5r squared. Now the second property is what to do with negative exponents. So with negative exponents, we need to rewrite them as positive exponents and then evaluate or simplify if we can. So a term with a negative exponent can be rewritten as the reciprocal of the term with a positive exponent. Now let's just review what a reciprocal is. So if you have the number 2, you could think of it as 2 over 1. The reciprocal of 2 over 1 is simply, flipping as a way to think of it, is just 1 over 2. With 3 to the negative 3 power, we can think of it as over 1. So we're going to flip that. We're going to put that 1 over 3. And then when that happens, when we move it to the denominator, the power becomes positive. And then we can go ahead and evaluate. 3 to the third power is 27. So 3 to the negative 3 is actually saying 1/27. Now in B, you just want to watch out because it's only the x that is being raised to the negative power. So the negative 3 to the first power is unaffected. The y to the first power is unaffected, but it's only x to the negative 2 that needs to drop into the denominator. And when it does that, the exponent becomes positive. So only the term with the negative exponent. So you probably guessed it on C. It's only the m that is affected. So the 2 is not, because technically a 2 is to the first power. So then this will become m to the positive, and it's going to multiply by that 1, so that's just m squared over 2. Now let's practice using those properties. So we often use many properties in each problem, so you just have to be flexible and take a look at what you've got and think of the properties. So I definitely see an x to the 0 power, so we can simplify that to 1. I see y to the negative 2, so we can drop that into the denominator and make that positive. Now, with 7/14, I can think of that as a fraction and reduce that to 1/2. So 1 times 1 is 1. We do need to write it since we don't have any other term up there. And then in the numerator, 2y squared. So completely simplified, we have 1 over 2y squared. In number 2, remember that 3 is to the first power, a is to the first power. It's only b that's to the 0 power, so that's the only term that will become 1. So 3a times 1 is simply 3a. Now this is telling us that both the negative and the 4 are being raised to the negative 2 power. You can think of that as over 1. So we need to take the reciprocal of that and make that a positive power. And then we can just go ahead and do that math. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. Let's continue simplifying. Now notice that we have all of these terms in the parentheses on number 4 being raised to the 0 power. No matter what they are, anything, except for 0, but I don't see any zeros in there, anything raised to the 0 power there is 1. So we can just rewrite that as 1. On number 5, I see some negative exponents, so I can drop them into the denominator, a to the positive, b to the positive, and then I see c to the 0 power, which would be 1, so simplified, a to the first power is simply a, b squared. Now on number 6, let's take it one term at a time. So technically this is negative 1 times 3 to the negative 2 power. We'll simplify that in a moment. M to the 0 power is 1, and then n to the negative 2. So my negative 1 is not to a negative power, times 1. My 3 is, so I'm going to drop that into the denominator, and I'm going to drop my n into the denominator. Remember, when I do that, I'm taking the reciprocal, I make the power positive. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. 3 squared is 9 over n squared. Now with these, just remember taking one term at a time to simplify. Okay, 7, 8, 9, taking one term at a time. So notice our negative 3, that's technically to the first power, so that's going to be unaffected. But it's our x that's to the negative 5 power, so I'm going to drop that into my denominator. I create a denominator, and then it's the positive 5th power, and that's all I need to do to simplify. All right, up top. Now I notice right away I have 2 and a 12, so I'm going to reduce that to 1, 6. I'm going to go ahead and write my 1 for now. U to the 0 power is 1. And then I have here v to the 3rd divided by v squared, so I can use my quotient property by subtracting those exponents. So I'll get 1b to the 1st power. And then I can just rewrite that. I don't need my 1 multiplier. Simply v over 6. And number 9. So we have negative and then 5 to the negative 3. So I'm going to hold my negative out there. I'm going to drop my 5 into the denominator. And then 5 to the third power is 125.